I am here in Medjugorje and I'm with, what's your name?
Miroslav.
Where are you from?
I was born in Zenica, which is a Bosnian town close to Sarajevo. About, I want to say 30, 40 miles away from Sarajevo.
There are Catholics there?
Yes, yes.
A lot?
Well, I don't, the stats have skewed a little bit, but before the war, maybe about 20%. Just like general Bosnian statistics, maybe around 20%, 18-20%.
But you live in America. What happened?
I do. I live in Boston, in Massachusetts. And I'm here now just for a day trip because my brother lives in close to Split. And in 1990, I wanted to find a job. And I spoke 2 languages. I was studying linguistics and spoke some English and some Spanish. So I looked for a job as a tour agent, tour guide. And I applied to 2 biggest tour agencies in Yugoslavia at that time, Atlas and Compass. And I was fully expecting to find a job at the coast, Dubrovnik, Makarska, any of those places, islands. Just earn a little bit of money, maybe have a little bit of fun, and then come back and finish my studies. But then Compass, a Slovenian agency, invited me to Medjugorje for a 7-day kind of, I don't even know, seminar or a mini conference to see which of the candidates could potentially get a job here. So I arrived not knowing actually where I was going to. Medjugorje was in the news in the early 80s, like 81, in a very negative sense. Like some sort of a anti-government plot to overthrow this beautiful communist regime. And I thought it just went away, to be honest with you, because there wasn't much in the news. Even my parish priest, I grew up Catholic, both my parents, we actually lived close to a church, but he never spoke of it. And he would occasionally talk about Lourdes. I didn't even know what it was, to be honest with you. I think I grew up as a habitual Catholic, to please my mom, go to church on Sunday, went through all the religious education, all the sacraments, but it never fully resonated. It felt like God was something of the past, and we are just upholding a tradition in a way. And then I went to study in Sarajevo, bigger city, and it's very mixed community, a lot of Muslim population, Orthodox Serbs, some Catholics, a lot of atheists, a lot of people of no faith. Truly convinced that the only way is the way of the world. And 3 years in, my mother died in the meantime, unexpectedly, fairly young, like 56. And I said I need to find a job. I applied to these agencies, and then I found myself here, completely amazed by just the size of the events, which, having been 120, 30 miles away, I was completely unaware of. It's surprising because it's not that far, and Catholic community was pretty tightly knit. At that time, I didn't think much about the whole Franciscan versus diocesan split, and my parish priest was a diocesan priest, and maybe that was one of the reasons. Maybe he just followed the verdict of the bishop of Mostar, and he just didn't want to talk about it. But I was amazed. We met Ivan, we met Vicka. They spoke about these events. They spoke about Our Lady as somebody that they can see, touch, feel, talk to, like a real person. And I think something started happening. I would want to say that I immediately started feeling a fire, and I converted and I became a perfect person. Like, it wasn't like that. But I remember, just going from a hotel to to this room where we had this seminar, almost as if I was lifted off the ground a little bit. It just didn't feel like walking. It felt like, you know, something lighter than that. So I prayed to get the job. I needed a job, but also I wanted to be here just to experience more of it. I didn't get the job. Surprise, surprise. You know, they figured that maybe my psychological profile wasn't the perfect fit for the tour guide. I don't know. But then I got an invite by Atlas, another big agency in Dubrovnik. And the same thing, 7 days. I'm thinking, you know, okay, you know, this is, Medjugorje wasn't in my plans. Dubrovnik always was. Maybe that's where I was meant to be. So when we did a little bit of an exam, all I could talk about was Medjugorje. And they said, well, we have a perfect place for you, because we have a tour agency there and we'd love to send you there. So I got the job, and Atlas used to be up the street a little bit, small agency. The village wasn't as built up in 1990. This is 1990, so it's about 9 years in. And as everybody knows, things started to become real tense in the country politically. But it didn't matter to me. You know, I got here in April, started guiding in Spanish and English, and my Spanish was a bit shaky, so I was a little bit nervous about the whole thing. Then I came to the agency, and they said, well, we have to warn you. One of the visionaries, Mirjana, she actually works here. But the rule of the game is we don't really, here at work, we don't talk about apparitions much. We just try to keep this business. Basically, she had a back office job because she needed a job. You know, she needed. I think she was either about to get married or she got married around that time, and she was starting to think, you know, how to support her family. She did not have any children. But that left some impression on me, because I was there sitting next to the visionary who basically converses with Our Lady. I think at that time was once a year, because she had already received her secrets. And then I started, you know, doing the job, organizing these tours, talking to priests, leading them to Apparition Hill, Križevac, you know, the Hill of the Cross, taking them to Vicka's place, occasionally translating there for English speaking, sometimes Spanish speaking as well. Maria would sometimes come out of her house and talk. Ivan would do it regularly. Jakov did not, he was shy, and I think Ivanka was already married and she lived a separate life. And I had a chance to meet Father Slavko too, because he was basically at the heart of everything. And I remember one occasion that left a lasting impression on me. And you know, this morning I went to pray at his grave a little bit, because he was one special person.
Why?
So calm, intelligent but not dominant, very good listener, very meek, you know, humble. Like, he spoke, I don't know how many languages, 6, 7. He had a lot of degrees, PhDs, psychology. But we were once in a session, maybe about 50, 60 of us, where he would just basically talk about faith. You know, talk about how to pray with heart and fast with heart. And then he started chanting Our Father. And I remember that, you know, it was so humble, so beautiful. And there was a bit of a division, you know, if you were a local who grew up here, you were considered somehow like a person who is very familiar with events and knows all the visionaries potentially personally. I was a bit of an outsider. There was no hostility or anything, just, you know, I wasn't part of the inner circle. My name was also a bit, it hints that I could be Orthodox, I could be Catholic. And people didn't ask, but with Father Slavko, you know, you just always felt in. You always felt you were part of the innermost circle, because he looked at you as a human being, you know, as somebody who's on their own path to maybe meet God and to find the purpose of their lives in God, in Jesus Christ. And one time, it was a hot day. You've been here in summertime. It's very, very hot. I lived in a very humble, small room up the street. I was walking up. Actually, this was a year later. I lived further away, so it was about like 2-mile walk. And then an old car stops, and somebody calls me in, and it's Father Slavko. And he said, "Hey, I'll give you a ride." "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going home to where I live." And he said, "You must be the only tour guide here who doesn't have a car." And I said, "I don't know, maybe I am, maybe I'm not," but I did not have a car. And he said, come in, I'll give you a ride." But he was the only one who ever gave me a ride. And I walked every day to my place. And I'm telling you, he was maybe the busiest guy, the busiest person in the whole community. Everybody wanted his time. But he was the one who found time to give me a ride. And I didn't even know him that well. He just saw me around, you know. I think it taught me a little bit about maybe what true faith is, or what sainthood is, almost. At that time, you know, I thought Father Slavko would live, you know, like until 90. I was very shocked when he died, but and then
What did you learn? This is very important. You said you learned something about sainthood. What was it about the faith? And keep the other thought.
Every moment is a moment to see Christ in somebody. And I didn't think of it that way, but I think he did. And it could be somebody who's walking on a hot day and maybe, you know, needs just a mile of a ride. Something really small that we don't think about. At that time, I remember, you know, I may even have had some splinters on my feet. It was painful. But he always found that time. And when I reflect on my life, how many times do I not find time to help somebody like that, you know? Because I always have good excuses. I'm busy, you know, I'm running, family, work, all of this. And he was the busiest person in the whole village, and he always found time.
Wow.
That's how I felt about him.
Keep going, yeah?
And then I remember this as if it was yesterday. He's in the car, and I think it was either Wednesday or Friday, and he was clearly fasting. Father Slavko, I think, fasted more than Wednesdays and Fridays. But he was eating some nuts, maybe walnuts or some other nuts. And he asked me, "What do you think? Will Our Lady be angry with me that I'm not eating only bread, but just some nuts today?" And I was a bit surprised. He said it half jokingly. Like, he had this really light approach to things where he would always joke a little bit, but it felt light, you know, never. And I said, "I don't know." I don't think so. Like, I'm not an expert in this, you are. But he's asking me, and he said, I think she'll be okay with that. I mean, such an innocent thing. Like, he had like 2 or 3, maybe walnuts or some other nuts, I can't remember. But even that, you know, left an impression on me. It's like, fasting is not easy, and how many times have I broken my fasts because of the temptation of food, but not with a few nuts, you know, with something bigger than that. So
I always wonder, you know, you met him.
I did, yeah.
What would he have thought of me doing these videos? That's what I often ask.
I think he would have liked it. I think he would have liked it. I think, not that I think that my testimony is particularly important, but you've had some that were really, really good, you know, that I watched in the United States. I think Father Slavko once said, you know, there are so many people that have so many ideas, but when you ask them to do something, they are nowhere to be found. So it's like all these ideas, and when I start thinking like who can do what, like there's nobody. People just go away. So I think a lot of people think of something like this, but this requires effort. And I think he would have really appreciated that somebody's actually putting an effort to do it. And you're doing it with consistency, over years. He would have liked it, I'm quite certain.
Wow. And for you, fasting difficult?
Sometimes it is.
Yeah.
Oftentimes it is. But, fasting, I think, fortified with prayer is powerful and it's much easier. But when either one is weak, either prayer or fasting, they're like two pillars, then it becomes difficult.
So true. Ask for the grace of fasting, my friends. That's the secret behind it.
A few interesting anecdotes. I always liked Vicka as a visionary.
Explain a bit about them, yes.
Well, she's such a pure, to me, she's a pure person. That doesn't mean she's spotless, like, how can we ever know? But I think she always had that sincerity about her. She always had time. So many times I could tell she was in pain, but there were sick people coming to her and she would lay her hands and pray over them. And she was maybe in more pain than them, but she always found the energy and patience to spend time with people, especially the ones who were sick. But one time, and again, we weren't friends, we weren't close in any way, but she knew who I was because sometimes she would ask me to translate when there were no other translators that were maybe closer to her. But I remember, one time there was this tour guide from Dubrovnik, a young lady, and we socially saw each other here and there. And this is a small village, so Vicka one time pulled me aside and she said, that girl that you sometimes socialize with, I don't think she's the right girl for you. And I was stunned because we weren't dating or anything. And I knew in a small village, nothing gets unnoticed. She was absolutely right, I think, in retrospect. But it was interesting that she even ventured into that territory. I don't know what kind of foresight or insight she had, but it stuck in my head and was an interesting little anecdote. I think one thing I learned about visionaries, they are far from perfect. They are humans. For a while I struggled myself with why did they not go into consecrated life? Why did they not become priests or nuns? Over time it became clear to me that I think where faith is defended is family. More so, and I'm not saying I think consecrated life is extremely beautiful, extremely important, but I really think that family is almost harder in this age, in this time. And I think everything that happened after the 90s and what's happening in the United States of America, what's happening in Europe, the attack on family, this brutal attack on family, makes it clear to me that they chose a life that was no easier than consecrated life. In a way, it would have been easier to just, go somewhere into a monastery and pray, but actually to live this life like all of us every day and to try raise children, and that was difficult.
Wow. And in which way did Medjugorje change you? You came here, you became a tour guide, you were so long here.
Yeah, I was here that year, and then the following year I was hoping to come back and do another year, started learning Italian to be able to guide Italian groups, but that's when the war started and basically people stopped coming. It was too dangerous. Then I went back, I got married. My wife is from my town, she's Orthodox. And we've had a really good marriage. We've grown in faith, especially in recent years, together. I have two children, two sons. So in the 1990s, during the war, I worked for the International Red Cross and for some humanitarian agencies. But then my son was born in 1990. 1983. I'm trying to remember my son's birth date. So it was April 15th, and I remember, we took him to the from the hospital, which was near my house, to my father has a big house, and we lived there. And I remember not knowing how to protect that small life, not knowing how to, really not knowing what to do. It was also the week when actually the second part of the war started, when Muslim forces, the Bosnian army and Croatian forces started fighting each other, which reflected on our town, on our community. So literally that day when we brought him in, there was some shooting around our house. And I remember saying, I can't protect this child. I prayed to Our Lady and said, he's yours, you protect him. I'm begging you, because I don't know, this is beyond my powers as a human being. And I think in a lot of cases, even more trivial cases, I think we should give everything we have to God and ask God for protection and to govern our lives. But especially during the war, where anybody could have gotten into our house and basically anybody could have done anything to us. Because the Bosnian army quickly overtook some of the Croatian units around there. There wasn't much fighting after that. But I asked for that protection, and about 35 days later, I think Our Lady acted magnificently, and my prayer was heard, because I was out working for the International Red Cross, as I said, in the field, registering prisoners, translating for the Swiss delegates, delivering humanitarian aid, all kinds of things. My wife, there is a kind of a tradition here. When the child is 40 days old, you can take him out. Like in America, it's different. You can take a small baby out even before. But here, like, baby should be at home, and then you can take the baby out. So she decided to take him out to her mother's apartment. Her father had died a few months before that. And it's a big apartment building across the whole city. Not a large city, about 120,000 people, but enough in distance. So she went all the way there. And the neighbors gathered, her grandma was there, her mother, her sister worked with me for the same company or agency. And then a few of the closest neighbors came into their kitchen. Kitchen is a gathering place in Bosnia, to just see the child. It's the most common of things. And that day some shelling started from across the mountain. I can't tell whether it came from the Serbian side, Croatian side. Really impossible, the mortar shelling. And when I came back from work, everybody looked worried, and we were all worried all the time. And they said, you shouldn't worry, everything turned out okay. It's like, what? Well, there was shelling in the city, and have you heard? It's like, yeah, I've heard there was shelling. But we were used to it by then. Shelling was not a big deal. Like, we weren't even going to the cellars, to the basements anymore. Just take your chances, It's been a year, and they said, but the mortar shell hit your mother-in-law's apartment. It's like, okay, what? It's like, yeah, and your son was there. It's like, what? But they said everything turned out fine. And then I called my wife, and she said, well, we were sitting there and shelling started, and then we were debating, do we go to the basement? It's a 9th floor, apartment. And somebody said, you know what, let's not do it, let's just sit here. And then some other neighbors said, well, but the baby is asleep. Let's actually take him to the bathroom. The bathroom didn't have any windows. Let's take him to the bathroom so he doesn't wake up because of the shelling. It's quieter. And as they moved from the kitchen to the bathroom, it's like 65 square meter apartment, very small place. Actually, a 122 millimeter shell grenade hit the railing of the balcony of that kitchen where they were sitting. and destroyed everything in it. They were all already in the corridor towards the bathroom, and nobody, not a single person was hurt, not even a scratch. And my son, his name is Luka, he didn't even wake up. I consider this a true miracle, because the shrapnels should have hurt somebody. And it was a matter of literally 2 or 3 seconds. If they stayed in the kitchen, I think they all would have been killed. Because when I arrived later, there was no wall, no window, no wall, no balcony, like cement. There was a cement railing, concrete railing, all destroyed. And the whole kitchen was destroyed. And there was a red stuff on the walls, but it was tomato sauce from the fridge. The whole fridge was destroyed. And that's when I realized, how strong is Our Lady's protection. She basically shielded everybody in that place. That was the only apartment that was hit by a direct hit. That day, and possibly even throughout the war, this is an apartment complex of about 10 buildings, all about 10 to 12 stories high. It's just the chance, and then I think the miracle accompanying. So as the war wound down, we moved to Croatia, to Zagreb, lived there for a few years. My wife couldn't get her paperwork in order because she wasn't Catholic, she wasn't Croat. And we said, well, maybe we should go elsewhere. We should try to live somewhere else where we can both be on equal footing, at least from the paperwork perspective. We entered a refugee program to come to the United States. We were quickly approved because at that time, a mixed marriage that we were considered to be was what qualified me for the program. So we ended up in Boston. And the rest of it is not that interesting. It's just daily drudgery, work, trying to build up that family in a place that's very different. My son was born 8 years later, my younger son was born. We had our ups and downs, and I want to be honest and say, I wish I could say I was faithful Catholic, went to church all the time. I wasn't. In a way, there were years of neglect on my part. And God was always near, but I wasn't near God. God was near me, I wasn't near God at times. And I think part of that was just the daily routines, trying to not make ends meet. We did better than that, but just trying to build up a life.
When you come to Medjugorje, you said you were a cultural Catholic.
More than that, we did go to church, traditionally and culturally Catholic. Mm-hmm. What was your question, sorry? When
you came here, your faith changed when you saw the visionaries, Father Slavko?
I believed in the events because I met the young people at that time. They were not children anymore. When I came back home, I told my priest that I was very, very impressed. And then he actually gave me a book on Fatima. And I read that end to end, like in 2 days. And I was stunned at how similar the events were. How similar even the visionaries were. Young children, small village. Really not informed about the world. And you could maybe say differently for Ivanka. Mm-hmm. For Mirjana, who lived in a bigger city. Then I read a little bit about Lourdes and, the whole world of Our Lady's interventions into the world opened up that I wasn't aware of. In the meantime, because of where I live, I was able to visit these places. My wife and I went to Lourdes last September. We had gone to Fatima 2 or 3 years ago, and we my son and I went to Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico City about 2 years ago. And I think what stuns me about these places, Medjugorje is no exception. In a way, Medjugorje is even more alive because the events are still current, is how alive faith is. And I've experienced in the United States churches that are not open, confessions that don't exist unless you call somebody to make an appointment, as if it's a barber shop, you know. And I understand it, you know, priests are overwhelmed. But, you know, I've seen empty churches. I've seen them in decay physically, but more importantly, as a community of faithful. I think there is a bit of a revival going on now. But, and then, you know, you come to a place like this and the faith is so alive. Or Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico, where there are 12 masses every day and every one of them feels like Sunday. And my wife and I went to no special occasion to Lourdes. It was beautiful to pray rosary with about maybe 10,000 people and, you know, be part of the procession. I think what I feel now is the way I was called when I was young here. I feel called again. And now our lives are in such a place where we can come back to Croatia more often, and then, you know, Medjugorje is not far from Split, less than 2 hours, which is what I did today, just came for a day trip. But in the past couple of years I've been here for the youth festival, and I've been here on a number of occasions, and it's not just the nostalgia for the, you know, older times when I was younger. I think I feel like God's calling me to be close to Him through His mother again.
Wow, that's amazing. And you still, all these changes here now, no? 1990 to now?
A lot of change, you know, some of it I don't like. You know, a lot of shops, a lot of construction that feels like half finished, half. But it's, you know, it's human affairs always like that. It's a bit messy. And, you know, I've learned to screen. You know, there were things I didn't like in Lourdes or Fatima either. But, you know, just praying the rosary and being part of these, of the evening program. And, you know, I met with a friend of mine who was a tour guide, and he has his own tour agency now. He lives in Zagreb. And, you know, we had coffee a few years ago here, and he said, well, you know, you should have told me earlier that you are here. You know, we had some party the other night, and, you know, you could have joined us. And I said, well, in the early 1990, I joined the parties, and I didn't always join the evening program. And now I've come with a different heart, different mindset. I've come to actually do adoration. I've come to pray rosary, and more than one. And
Why do you do that now?
I've come to do things that are not. And if there's time after all of this, I'm always good for a party too, because I think, you know, I think as faithful we should have fun. We should be joyful. We should socialize. We should, you know, participate in these things. But my priorities are very different now.
Why is that? Hardship?
Well, when my wife and I went to Fatima, it would have been about 3 years ago, almost to a dot. It was in May. We came back, and Fatima was I read a lot about Fatima and wanted to go for many years, and it was very impressive, and I loved, you know, walking the paths and praying the rosaries and being part of the procession. Then we came back, and I started having daily headaches, every day. Unbearable at times, and at times bearable, but there. So Boston's a big medical center of US. It has some of the best hospitals in the United States of America. You know, some of them are very famous. University hospitals associated with Harvard University, and the doctors couldn't pin it down. to this day, they don't know why I have daily headaches. So I spent quite a few months in bed, following some diagnosis and things like that. And then I started thinking of a headache, and obviously, my first thought was, I think my spiritual life intensified. I was already on a different path spiritually, where, I realized that I've distanced myself from God for no good reason, and nothing good came out of it. And now repentance, I want to be close to God, if He'll want me, if He'll have me. And we know our God is so merciful that He will want me. And then I started thinking, how does this play into this plan, And I would want to say that God gave me some direction and said, well, you have these headaches because of X, Y, Z. Well, it's not like that, it's a daily struggle. But I feel strongly called to a daily prayer, to as much fasting as I can have, to all the sacraments. I started going to Adoration. We have a chapel, St. Francis Chapel, in one of the luxury shopping malls in Boston. It's a very unique place because it's a very expensive shopping mall. But that chapel has adoration every day, has confessions for like 4 or 5 hours every day, has like 4 or 5 masses. It's oblates of the Virgin Mary. So I've been going there a lot, and just trying to grow closer to God. Maybe it's also a realization that life is not as long. There's not as much time. I think there's never as much time, but when you are younger, you are easily fooled thinking there is a lot of time ahead of me, and I can live certain life. I think I'm probably a good example of somebody who was a little bit calculating, It's like, well, while I'm young, I'm going to do these things and travel and experience, and then when I'm older, I'm going to settle my accounts with God. And honestly, I think there was a bit of pride on my part. It's almost like as if I'm dictating the rules of the game. It's like, I'm somehow gonna do it on my terms. And then, I think God always gives us what we can bear. And these headaches that I've been having are bearable. But they are a constant reminder that God sets the rules. The best I can do is embrace them and say, may it be your will. And whatever you give me today, I'll embrace. And I have to be honest, some days are hard. Some days, I broke into tears. And some days, I just feel like tremendous joy and gratitude that I have this affliction. St. Paul had an affliction and God didn't want to lift it. It's not that I want to compare myself to St. Paul, but God knows whose afflictions need to be lifted for their spiritual betterment and whose afflictions should not be lifted because it's better for them. I might be in the latter category, I'm starting to think. So, today I was at English Mass, and I love it. I often tuned into the sermons from the English Mass. I just love the variety of our Catholic faith. Experiencing Spanish Mass, different versions of English Mass, just different styles and still it's the same Mass, it's the same sacrifice. So I was there, and honestly, my headache was so strong, and the only thought was, well, if I can join this sacrifice to the sacrifice of our Lord and be 1,000th or 1 percentile of suffering that He experienced, maybe for conversion of people that I know that need a little bit of a push, that's all I can contribute, And I'm glad, because when you are healthy, when everything's going your way, then you can be more calculating like I was. And now I think I understand much better. I understand much better the will of God and how to attune to it. And that actually is the ultimate joy. And I'm not saying I'm all the way there, I'm just saying that I understand that that's where I need to go. Attune myself to the will of God on every day, and then whatever the will of God is for that day, just be happy with it.
Wow, and how do you tune into the divine will? Is it an intention? Or?
I started praying the Angelus 3 times a day. I've been doing that for a few years, and I've noticed that my spiritual life is more stable through that. It's somehow more stable. I think that's the right term. Praying the rosary, and I wish I could tell you I do it every day. I do it most days, and sometimes all mysteries. But sometimes I have to do it through a sheer act of will, because it's not everything in me doesn't want to pray. But then there is that will that can override, all the sentiments and say, well, this is really what you should do, and that certainly helps. Fasting when I can. I found it more difficult since I've been having headaches. It's been more difficult to fast. Mm-hmm. And Our Lady gives a bit of a dispensation here and says, if you are sick, maybe you can abide by slightly different rules. It comes as a convenient excuse sometimes, but I did not practice, going for adoration and just sitting quietly for half an hour. I started doing that a few years ago, and now I embrace it. This chapel is close to the place of my work, and sometimes I just break day into 2, go there for half an hour, and just sit there with our Lord, and just say, I'm here. I'm here, and if there's anything you want to whisper into my ear, I'll try open my ears for that, because it seems to me that God never yells. He always whispers, and sometimes we can't hear it because our ears are full of all the other stuff. Really trying to go to more frequent confession. And honestly, sometimes that's not easy. I once went, we have St. Anthony Shrine in Boston too, and they are Franciscans, and they are really good priests. But one time, a priest literally told me, why have you come here? I said, my last confession was a week ago, and he's like, well, why have you come again? Well, because there are little things, there are little spots that start gathering. It's like little specks of dust. It's still not huge. And he's like, well, I don't want you here this often. It's like, doesn't feel right, feels a bit hurtful, to be honest. And it's not like there are huge lines, you know what I mean? It's like 2 people, 3 people. So sometimes even, and I think we need a lot of love and understanding of our priests. I think we need to pray for them, because, my goodness, if we are challenged and attacked sometimes, imagine what they must be going through. And then my determination was like, well, I'm gonna come again. You can kick me out, but I'll be here again and again. So more frequent confession. I think reading the books of saints. I'm more in tune with this community of saints, this phenomenal family of the dead that we have, and just learning from their lives.
What did you learn, for example?
New saints, old saints, the ones that were, I'll give you one example. There is a Croatian saint, his name is Leopold Mandić. There is his statue over there.
At the confessionals, my friends, when you come here?
Yeah, because he was in the confessional for 15 hours a day. And I remember reading a biography in Croatian language. He grew up in Montenegrin town, coastal town. I believe he grew up in Kotor or Herceg-Novi, one of those. So he was hurt by a priest because he had some small sin to confess as a child, and the priest gave him a very, very harsh penance. like super harsh. He had to stay in church for an hour and kneel on something. Like there was something really, and he felt that it wasn't just. As a child, he felt like this was too hard, and the sin wasn't like some of those big mortal sins. I don't know the details. I maybe he didn't even mention the biographer. And he said, if I ever become a priest, I'm going to give people light penances. But if their sins are grave, I'm going to take the bigger part of it on myself. So I'm going to split penance in two. Give the person a bit lighter one so they don't feel overwhelmed and don't feel that they should be deterred and not come to confession again or something like that. And then he said, but if they deserve bigger penance and maybe more prayers, I'm going to take that on and I'm going to actually do the rest. To me, that was very interesting.
But you do all this out of love, I guess, no?
Out of love.
It's not that you think, I have to appease this angry old man.
Yes.
You experience him, he's he's interested in your life.
Yes.
Every aspect, you can talk to him like a friend.
Yes.
Not judgmental, like harsh. And
Yes. And that was exactly, I think, his message there.
Yeah.
That was his story. It's like, God is love, God is forgiving. We still have to atone for our sins. We still have to feel sorry and repentant. But he said, out of love for that person, out of love for God, I'm going to actually do some extra, so that person doesn't feel penalized so harshly that they would not want to even come back or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And you made now the experience what Saint John of the Cross said, at the end we are judged how much we love.
Yes.
That's our faith. We should constantly love. That's the goal.
Yes. And I have to say, love our enemies. We as Croatian people can do better, because it's sometimes very easy to love an abstract enemy. But my God, if we have to love a concrete one, like a Serb on the other side or a Muslim on the other side, well, that's hard, because that comes personal. It's like, I love anybody but them, and that's why we had this war. It's like, we love them all, but when it comes close to home, it's like, no, we're going to dig in. And it's not just the war. The war happens because people can't agree on something, whether it's territory, whatever. But it's that hatred that conquers the heart, and I've seen that a lot. And I think we as Catholics could have done better at times, and should have done better. And I'm not saying, it's much easier for me to judge my side, because that feels like home. And I think we still can do better at times. Just embracing and loving somebody that we feel is threatening our existence as a true enemy.
Mm-hmm. So it's our journeys that our heart becomes more and more loving, every chamber of our heart?
Absolutely. And it's hard to internalize that and convert that into action on a daily basis. As an abstract, it sounds right. Well, we just love but love in concrete terms, as a modus of living. And that's what I felt with Slavko Barbaric, Father Slavko. It's like, he lived it. He lived that love. I guarantee you, if I had an issue at 2 a.m. and I knocked at the door of that rectory, he would have been like, okay, what is your, I'm gonna wake up now and just give you whatever time you need. I never did that, but I felt like he would have done that. Whatever problem I had, he would have been there to say, well, come, let's talk, let's...
That's what we all yearn for, to have a person like this in our life.
But that's how many people would say, this priest in Boston was bothered that I came during the allotted 1 hour of confession, and I came maybe a tad too frequently, not to judge that person, because but Father Slavko was different.
Wow. And we pray for our priests, like you said.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What must I thought this morning? What am I going through? What must they go through? This morning I thought this.
Absolutely.
If you work for God, if you give the sacraments, this is the portal to heaven, no? The sacrament, the Eucharist. And why do you go to Holy Mass so often now? What is so beautiful about
To the Holy Mass?
Yeah.
I understand the living presence of God. You know, that was always taught to me, but I don't think I ever understood it. And it didn't. It's like, what do you mean God is actually alive in the host? I don't even think as a young person I even thought about that. And if you would have asked me, you know, what is the host, despite all the catechism and all the religious education, which was actually before the war, it was done by priests, so it was quite proper. I probably would have said, well, it just symbolically represents, you know, Jesus. Well, now I know it's not symbolic; it's real. It's real, and it beats my understanding, but it's real. And you know, I've read about Eucharistic miracles. I've been to the place in Croatia where they have the blood of Jesus. You know, like hundreds of years old Eucharistic miracle. And I know that it's real, that it's real Lord residing in the host. Once you understand it's real, and I think that was always the message here, you know, go to Mass, that's the most important thing. Once you understand it's real Jesus, it's like, where else would you want to be? Now, do I go to 2 Masses a day? I don't, but you know, I go way more often than just Sunday. And I'll tell you one thing, as I was thinking, this was very important part, as I was feeling this disease, this headache, reminded me of Vicka a lot because she struggled with headaches and she had it maybe easier because Our Lady gave it to her as a mission. Well, I didn't have that privilege to be given it as a mission by God, but I think intrinsically I knew that God was sending me some message through it. But I was thinking around that time, and maybe even before, but really strongly around that time. You see, I'm a tall person. I always loved basketball. And being in Boston, I was able to go and, you know, see a lot of Boston Celtics NBA games. I love it. I love watching basketball on TV too. And at the same time, I was talking to people and saying increasingly, God is the most important thing in our lives. God is what matters the most. Everything else is kind of secondary or tertiary. And then, you know, I was thinking, well, how do I spend my time? Oh, I go to Mass on Sunday, and Mass is sometimes half an hour, sometimes 45 minutes, and that's about it. Like, I've done my obligation to God. How much time do I spend watching basketball? 8 hours a week? 6 to 8? Who is then my God? Who is my God? Then I realized, well, how you spend your time is what you believe in. So basketball is in a way my idol. That's how I've been spending a lot of my time. And then I give God half an hour. And even that, like, oh, there is morning Mass, which is shorter, and then there is one later that has more singing, so it's like 7 minutes longer. Well, let me go to the one that's shorter. Then I said, listen, stop being a hypocrite. Either don't believe in God if you don't think God exists. And in a way, it's easier for me to understand atheists who don't think God exists, and then they behave accordingly. I think the worst situation to be is a lukewarm way faith, and calculating faith, where we kind of believe and we are willing to give God half an hour a week. It's like, no, the balance has to shift. And that's when I started praying more, going to Masses more frequently, not necessarily picking the shortest Mass, but the one that is the most reverent, if I know of a few. And Tom, that's the shift I'm currently in. It's a journey, you know, it's not a perfect journey. It's not I have not reached any kind of perfection in my faith, far from it. It's a daily struggle, but I feel like I'm developing a relationship with Jesus.
You talk to him like a friend?
I talk to him like a friend sometimes.
He's
yes.
alive? You get
alive.
answers?
He's alive. He's alive, whether I'm in adoration and he's exposed in the host, or I can be anywhere in the car and just say, hey, Jesus, I have this problem. You know, these people at work are bothering me. I don't know what to do about it. I know that it's not that important. But I'm bothered by it, you know, I'm bothered by it. I'm bothered by whatever, you know, my retirement funds, the size of them, and whether I'm going to have enough to retire in dignity, you know. And then I say, well, if I don't, I don't, you know. Let me just understand your will, and then let me behave accordingly. You know, if your will for me is to be destitute in my old age, so be it. Just let me love it for it. Understanding that that's your will. And I think I know how I need to live, what I need to do, you know, what job I need to hold. And I'm going to pursue it because that's the best I know with my intellect. But if you think I should do something else, well, send me signals, you know.
And you send signals?
I think this headache was one where I really started rethinking everything deeply. Because when you have a daily headache, then I can pray with more conviction, and I can't watch basketball with as much joy. I think the whole focus shifts towards anything related to God fulfills me, anything else doesn't. That's the shift. When I was healthier, I was always a little bit sickly, but this was different, like this is daily. Then I realized, well, it's almost as if a portal was opened between me and God, and it's called a disease. And you know, I mean, we know that a lot of saints struggled with disease, with pain, with suffering, with physical suffering, afflictions. And I'm starting to see benefits of it. And there are times, initially I prayed for cure. Now I just pray for more and more meaning to come out of it, and for it to be a pathway between me and God, so that whatever, whether it's a day or a year or 10 years or 30 years, I'm basically on that bond gets stronger and stronger between me and Jesus, that friendship becomes a real thing and stronger every day.
Does your wife see changes in you?
Say that again.
Your wife sees changes in you all this way now? Because
my wife?
Yeah. Did you get more joyful, more patient? The fruits of the Holy Spirit?
I think so. I think so. And I was telling this friend of mine that I met here a few years ago. We were talking about some issues at work, and I said, listen, there is no problem in this world that one rosary cannot fix. And he's like, what do you mean? It's like, well, you know, I manage a big budget at work. Half the time I don't know what to do. I pray a rosary and things settle in. And this is like material stuff. This is like daily life. There was time when I think that my marriage wouldn't have survived without a rosary. It's not that we had any big conflicts or disagreements, me and my wife. It was a pretty good, stable, you know, steady relationship. But, you know, you have challenges. And I can tell, you know, how sometimes, like, the devil whispers into your ear. It's like, well, you know, you're doing a little bit more or a little bit less, or why things are not this way that I would like. And then it grows over time. And it's almost like you can tell it's not coming from you, because rationally everything's fine. And then, you know, when you pray a rosary, and we do that often, my wife and I, we pray rosary together, it's like all of these distractions, all of these thoughts just go away, you know. It's like we are two imperfect people on a journey. We raised two sons. We've done the best we could. They both have faith, which in America is not easy. And I feel blessed for that. And, you know, my wife and I are on a journey to grow in faith, I would say.
And what do you tell people struggling? They write me, please Tom, pray for my daughter is away from the faith, my son is away from the faith. Can you give them advice out of your experience?
My God, that's not easy to give advice. You know, there was a person, she's elderly now, 80 years old, Margaret Leahy. Mm-hmm. She had a big tour agency when I was here in the 90s, and I worked for her at times. They had a big contract with Atlas agency, like big contract. They were bringing a lot of people, and I met Margaret, and she was very well organized. And her husband in the meantime died. And I'm sure she would not mind me mentioning this, but her life has been such a struggle. She's a person of such strong faith, and she struggled in her own family, you know, with her children to have faith. And I don't know how that happens. I really don't, because if there is an example, if there is really you know, like somebody to look up to, and I looked up to her so many times in my life when I struggled with some questions, and it's hard to tell. You know, I think a good one. There is a professor at Harvard that I sometimes follow. His name is Arthur Brooks. I don't know if you know of him. He's a daily communicant, strong Catholic. He teaches at the business school. His wife grew up in Catalonia, in Barcelona, and people in Catalonia don't have faith. They have this anti-Franco, anti-Catholic sentiment. And he wanted more than anything that his wife experiences faith. He talked to a priest once, and I think he told him kind of what Bishop in Milan said to St. Augustine's mother. Monica, was that Monica?
Yep.
He said, you know what, stop bugging him about faith and start bugging God about him. And he said, from that time on, I stopped talking to my wife about faith, but I tripled my prayers. I tripled my prayers. And a lot of times, you know, with my sons, that's how I feel, you know. It's like the only thing I can do, they are now grown-ups, is just pray. Pray and maybe double it, you know. And I think maybe that's the only thing to do, really, and just leave everything else to God. God will lead them to the right place.
At His timing.
At His timing, at His timing.
But it's always for the good to experience now God the Father. Everything is for the good?
I think so, yes. Everything is for the good. Everything is for the good. And that's what Margaret does for her children. That's what I sometimes do for her children. And we need each other's prayers. You know,
yes, but Jesus said,
I will pray for your children, you know, on my way back to Split. You said you have a son and a daughter?
No. I'm.
Oh, just in general. You were saying in general. Oh, okay, sorry.
It's like beautiful what you are saying. I'm in awe, you know.
Yeah. I misunderstood. I thought you had a family situation, but no. I think generally, that's the only thing we can do. You know, I think what sustained me. I had an aunt who never married. She lived in Banja Luka, which during the war was Serbian controlled, and they were expelled. So they were forced to exchange their house for somebody else's house in Croatia. Not a good story, but in the end they settled in Croatia and they lived till the end of their lives. My aunt was very sick towards the end. She basically couldn't get out of bed. And I remember I came from the United States and visited briefly once, and she made an effort to get out of bed. But she was squirmed like this, like she was in terrible pain. Something happened to her spine, I don't know. And I could barely understand her, but she said, I'm praying for you and your children every day. And I'm thinking how much good must have come out of that. How many dangers we must have avoided through that. How many paths we have chosen correctly for that reason, you know. And I think that's really she did it for me, now I have to do it for others as well.
Maybe also for her in purgatory.
Yeah, yes, potentially, if she's not already with our Lord. But yeah, we don't know.
Or
so,
other people maybe, yeah.
yeah.
And do you use, we have another gift, the guardian angel. Are you...
That's really interesting. I've neglected my guardian angel for years. I think recently, as I've been listening more to Father Dan Rehill and Father Rippinger and a few other exorcists, the whole reality, the spiritual battle that's going on became clearer to me. And it's easy to overemphasize, overfocus on the bad angels, the rotten angels. And even with that, it's easy to forget our guardian angels. So I think really recently I started actually treating my guardian angel as somebody who's present and somebody who's a friend, who's there to protect. It just wasn't part of my repertoire. I don't know if you sometimes watch this guy Matt Fradd.
Heard about him?
Yeah, the Pints with Aquinas.
Yes.
He's a good.
He's
a good Catholic interviewer. And he said sometimes we have the proliferation of devotions, which I think is an honest assessment. There are so many different novenas and devotions we can do. It's almost like we have to pick what's right for us personally, but within the confines of the Catholic teaching, So clearly no choosing of whether to go to Mass or not. But maybe devotion to Saint Anthony, maybe a stronger devotion to the guardian angel, maybe a strong devotion to Leopold Mandic, or maybe Father Slavko, who might actually be a saint one day. And I think it's powerful to pray to people that we think might be saints, but they're not there yet. And the first Saturdays, the first Fridays, all these devotions, I think, can be a little bit overwhelming at times.
Yeah. And it's not, we don't have to perform. He wants that we love.
And I think
my friends out there.
Love. You mentioned, you say the word love a lot. I really like that, because it's when these devotions become an obligation and a duty, and they become heavy, and they become,
it's contrary to our faith.
Exactly. You start feeling like a Pharisee. It's like somebody who's just upholding a lot of laws. And yet, if a human being needs something, if Jesus in the form of some human being needs something, like, well, I'm too busy doing my devotions, I don't have time for you, or I don't have time to help in this situation. So I think you're right, it's love, really.
That's what Our Lady said, one pearl of the Rosary prayed with devotion and love is more than rattling down the whole thing and being somewhere else.
I don't know how you pray the Rosary. The Rosary is not the easiest prayer from the perspective of maintaining focus. As of maybe the last couple of years, I've been really trying to treat it more as a mental prayer, where I try to imagine myself in that situation. I can see Our Lady under the cross and see St. John, and I can see the two other Marys. And I'm somewhere there in the corner, like just trying to be in that scene and trying to see the pain of our Lord on the cross and Him bleeding. And it's an ugly scene, and then these two other thieves on the cross, and one is whispering one thing. It's like a good angel and a bad angel, and the Roman soldiers. So it's been much easier for me when I started to use my imagination as a way of praying. And it's not, I have to make an effort for it, but it always pays off. And then when the mind wanders, it's like, well, let me come back to that scene. I know what the scene is. I've been through it many times. So that has been really helpful to me, just trying to be in that scene. What does it look like when Mary goes to see Elizabeth? What does the journey look like? Is St. Joseph with her or not? I'm not sure. I assume he might have, maybe come with her a certain distance, maybe not. But then she meets her cousin and she's there to help, and the whole Magnificat, you know. I think just being able to do that, I think, is a gift.
And I think to add here, I think the human relationship, the marriage, when the wife says, "Are you with me in the moment?
Yes.
Do you still love me?" I think it's a reflection of God and our relationship with God. Are you with me? Are you here? I think he prefers if we are really with him for a moment, then we are like half with him for...
And so many times we're not. It's like, well, no, I'm in my retirement fund.
I'm getting the pizza later
what
on.
am I going to eat next? How are the Celtics doing? You know, is it going to be a trade or not? And then you realize, my goodness, none of it matters. But I think you are right. I think the marriage is the reflection of...
And we men don't understand women also, you know.
Yes.
They want us to be with them. Are you real? No? Are you there? But you know better. I mean, you are married. What do you tell people as an advice?
But you know, it's... I think now at the age of 60, being married over 30 years, I finally figured the marriage out.
Explain. We want to know it. Everybody wants to know it.
I'll bring back this guy, Arthur Brooks. And so my wife and I had this situation that sometimes has a potential to create a grievance in me. So it's very simple thing. I think a lot of issues come from very simple situations, trivial situations. So for example, I'm in the living room and she walks in and I say, "Hey, come sit next to me." And she always says, "Well, I'll sit across from you so I can see you. I can look at you." And it's like, why don't you just do what I want, you know? Well, first of all, like, yeah, why should she do what I want, right? But that's the first thought. And I think that's like a little devil whispering in your ear. Like, so, and then it's like, isn't it more natural we just sit next to each other? Even when we want to pray, she would always want to sit across. And then this guy, Arthur Brooks, explained it perfectly. He says it's actually the way that the male brain and female brain function and what we respond to. It's evolutionary, and he said, I respond well to touch. I always want to like be close to my wife and hold her hand, and she always wants to look at me. And
she wants communion. Look in my eyes.
Exactly.
Communion.
It has
and for
to
us,
do,
touching is the communion.
Exactly. And it's like, and he said, when you actually do what she wants, you've given up a little bit of that space that you think you should own, you humbled yourself a little bit, and that takes your marriage in the right direction. And I think it goes vice versa. But I was thinking, like, it's evolutionary actually in us. It's so deep, you know, it's almost written into our DNA. And I just thought she didn't want to do what I wanted her to do, you know. So sometimes, like, explaining these things, somebody else actually explaining them and me understanding, so there's a lot of learning in that regard. I can give you another one. There's this commentator that said, and I felt this so many times, my wife will start talking about something at her work and my mind goes immediately into problem solving. It's like, well, you should do this, you should do that, try this, try that. This is exactly how we can resolve that situation. And I can tell, I'm thinking I'm helping. I'm not helping. She's like increasingly more frustrated. And it's like, why? Oh, maybe my problem solving is not sharp enough. Let me double down on that. And then I realized, you know, again, somebody explained the difference between how our two brains are different. She doesn't want any solutions. She just wants to be listened to.
Communion again. Look in my eyes.
Exactly.
Communion.
She just wants to tell the story. No judgment, no solutioning, no. She has that problem. She wants to communicate it.
And be with you in the moment.
And I'm thinking I'm not even be in the moment.
Like you said with the priest.
Share that frustration.
And you said like when you had adoration, be in the moment with God.
Exactly.
Yeah?
And I'm like, if I don't offer solutions, I'm not being helpful. Like, it's coming from a good place, too. But it's like, okay, now I understand this better. And actually, when I started applying this and said, I'll just listen, oh my goodness, worked so much better. And she's like, now she's willing to tell me more, because I can tell that she's even potentially reluctant to tell me these stories, because she doesn't want solution right there. It's not what that's about. It's about communion.
Actually logic, because like the wife of my cousin, unfortunately they divorced, but he worked to provide.
Yeah.
But she said, but we are never together. Why should we have a relationship if you're not here?
And I'm a good example of somebody who's always thinking ahead, planning 10 years ahead, and very easy to forget that there is actually a moment to live in. But that's
what Jesus said. Live in the moment.
Yes.
Don't worry about the future. Does it must make you happy? Don't think about the past.
If God provides for the birds and flowers.
Yeah. Did you see that provision in your life, by the way? That God is providing, that it's real. I see it in my life. He is providing at the right time with the right thing. Because money is a big thing for people.
I have all the evidence in the world that God has gave me ample. I don't have a lot of gifts, and God has given me beyond the gifts that I was given. Just in terms of navigating life and being able to provide for the family, being able to hold certain jobs, I thought I would never be qualified. I mean, I've risen up to vice president of engineering for a company. I work for Harvard University in their IT departments, and I manage people that were way more educated than me. And you know, sometimes I did well, sometimes I didn't. But God has provided just materially beyond my wildest dreams, beyond what I thought would be possible.
Wow. And at the end, you have a favorite.
And the same goes for my wife. You know, she's done very well in her career, and God has been more than good to us, and really more than good.
Wow. And
I don't know if we've been grateful enough. You know, I think gratitude matters, and my wife and I talk a lot about gratitude, and that's also connected to living in the moment, because when you have gratitude, you are there. When you think ahead, you're not thankful for what you have. You are trying to grab something else, something that you don't possess. And I think you keep coming back to living in the moment, and I think that is really an important theme.
Being there. You can see it with your wife, you see it in prayer, being there in the moment, no?
You know, I was last night in Croatia. I had dinner with some cousins of mine. They're very simple people. You know, they have a little bit of land. They are retired now. What was impressive to me is one of their sons, they had 4 children. One of their sons lives in the Croatian capital, and he has 6 children. Both he and his wife are engineers. They're busy people. And so they said, so this is really impressive. The young people impress me so much. Even in the United States, that's true. There's a lot of good faith among young people. My son's generation, like the 20s. His father told me, you know, I said a swear once in the car, and his son stopped the car and said, "Dad, you are not allowed to say any swears in my car with my children." It's like, how amazing is that? You know, and he said, you know, one time we were there visiting them, and in the evening, it's the prayer time. And he said we sat in the corner, we sat in the room, and we alternate. So my son starts the prayer, then his wife, and then every one of their children, in the little children voices, they start praying, and then they start saying what they are grateful for. And you know, they were imitating one of their young children saying, "We are grateful for having grandparents to come and visit." It's like, I'm thinking, how much wisdom is there within that family? You know, how much God's intervention and God's grace. My goodness, it's amazing.
And why do you come back to Medjugorje now?
Because I feel like Our Lady calls. You know, we are called to be anywhere where there's Catholic Church and Catholic priest and Mass. So I don't believe that my local parish in Boston is any less significant than this beautiful shrine. But there is something special that's going on here. And I think it's good to see a lot of faithful, a lot of people who come for the same purpose. I love going to Križevac Mountain sometimes. I don't think there's any other Stations of the Cross anywhere else that has that is so beautifully rendered. You know, it just goes up a very steep mountain, and all those reliefs and the stations are beautiful. I feel at peace when I go to the Apparition Hill. I think now, to be honest, there is a little bit also of human curiosity, and I've heard Mirjana say a number of times, it's like, don't worry about the secrets, don't worry about, just strengthen your faith, you know.
And live in the moment.
But be in the moment. But I think the situation in the world is making me think that Medjugorje will also start unravel, you know, just the age also of the actors. I think Medjugorje will become more and more significant as everybody gets older. I think Our Lady has been preparing the world and this village for something really special. A lot of special things have already occurred, so many conversions, so many people have found their peace, they found their way back to church, found their way to confessional, found their reading of the scriptures, found living Jesus, and not just the Jesus from the books. But I have a feeling that this is just, it's just the foundation. There will be more
much more to come.
Mm-hmm. More to come. I mean, to me, it's also a journey back to the time when I was younger, but I think that's the least significant aspect. I think it's really living faith.
But it's your journey, no? It's very important to close the circles, no?
Yeah, in a way, it's closing of the circle, yes. I mean, seeing so many young people during the youth festival celebrate, just come here to sing to God, you know, pray to God, dance to God, it's all these expressions of prayer. I think it's wonderful, it's unique. It's very few places in the world where you can experience that. And I think being surrounded by other people of strong faith is good for us, because we are not supposed to be islands, we are supposed to be members of a community. Medjugorje of all the others comes a bit more naturally to me because of the language as well. And I love our Franciscan brothers, you know.
Me too, beautiful, no?
Are,
what a gift, we have to pray for the Franciscans.
And here it cuts deep, it goes centuries back, and
yeah.
Just the connection they have with the faithful is special. There was a lot of martyrdom, you know, especially after Second World War. They've suffered a lot during the Turkish time, Second World War.
Communist time as well?
I think communist time, you know, throughout. And I think they are wonderful. I think they are an inspiration. I love these fields, you know. A lot of it is disappearing, but I love walking from the church all the way to the Apparition Hill through the fields. And just, you know, those vineyards, as I said, it's sad that they'll disappear over time, but whilst they're still here, it's because, you know, I think in the old times and during the communist era, but even before, these fields are soaked with prayers, with angeluses, with rosaries, and I think that's, Our Lady said herself, she came here because faith was so strong. Every old woman, every young person, every man, you know, the faith in man is strong here. They've soaked these fields in prayers, and when you walk them, you feel that. It's a unique place.
And at the end, what would you tell people? Why come here?
Why to come here?
Yeah.
Yeah, just come and open your heart and attend the evening program, pray the rosary. Rosary is long but not that difficult, and you can find true joy in it. And Our Lady has been calling for it for centuries. Just come and be strengthened by the faith of others. If you haven't been to confession, come. There is nothing to fear because our Lord is merciful. It will be a wonderful experience. You will feel cleansed. You will feel light again. If you are physically able, walk slowly up those hills, pray the rosary or the Stations of the Cross. And I remember there was one testimony recently, some Spanish businessman who was a runner, and he didn't want to take any of it. He was persuaded by others to come here. And he said, okay, if you want to go pray the Stations of the Cross, I'm going to run up the mountain. I'm going to treat it as I'm training for the marathon or half marathon. He said, I went up a runner, I came back as a Catholic priest. And he is a Catholic priest now. So, a conversion will happen if you open up your heart. And whether you become a priest or a nun, or whether you
found a family?
You found a family, or maybe you tie your family back from pieces back to one whole, good things will happen because it all happens when you accept Jesus as your friend, everything else becomes orderly. Outside of that, things are disordered. So.
And start love and be in the moment, no?
Yeah,
love
be in the moment and think of love. And I sometimes forget that, to be honest. And thank you for reminding me, a few times. Everything else fades away, love to God and love to. I often say our faith is perfectly reflected in the cross because there's a vertical component where your love is directed towards God. Then there's horizontal component, and the cross is not whole if you don't have both. So you have to extend that love horizontally towards the people that are near you and people you encounter. But I think both kind of vertical and horizontal of the cross, they have to be based on love. Otherwise, we've missed the most important kind of law of all laws.
Wow, what can I say? Thank you for that beautiful interview.
Well, thank you, Tom.